felt like I didn't have time to be with him at this moment. So I put him in the consult room with security and just said, hey, take care of it for me. I'll get him to a room as soon as I can. Well, this consult room is just this like little room off of the waiting room. He goes in there, security puts him in there, and these must have been some new security guards. I hadn't met him yet or something like that. And the camera shows that that security guard walked out of that room, and within 60 seconds, that patient had taken his white t-shirt off and wrapped it around the door jamb and attempted to hang himself in my waiting room.
Hello, and welcome to the Art of Emergency Nursing podcast. This is where we share stories for inspiration, entertainment, and encouragement, because we all know emergency nurses have the best stories. Now here's your host, Kevin McFarland.
Hey everybody, Kevin McFarland here, and thank you for listening to the Art of Emergency Nursing podcast. I want to take a minute to remind you that if you haven't left a podcast rating and review, I would really appreciate it if you did. Many of you have left ratings, but not as many of you as I'd like have left reviews. Your good review is what helps other people find my podcast. And of course, the most important thing you can do for the podcast is recommending this podcast to your peers, whether it's someone you like or someone you don't like. There are many lessons learned, and I think every ER nurse needs to hear them. For your episode today, I have a podcast with an ER nurse and a nurse leader, and he's going to share lessons that he's learned both at the bedside and in the boardroom. I hope you enjoy this episode with my friend, Dustin. Dustin, tell the audience a little about who you are, what you do, and how long have you been a nurse?
All right. Well, so I'm Dustin. I'm the director of emergency and urgent care services at Carson Tahoe Health in Carson City, Nevada right now. I've been a nurse for going on 11 years. And I started in the ER in a very fast-paced trauma center in a nurse residency program, and then worked my way up into leadership there. After about 3 or 4 years, I was a charge nurse, and then I became a clinical supervisor there that reported directly to the director. So we had no nurse manager, and we kind of split the work between 4 of us of a nurse manager, and then did a lot of things with process improvement and policy and procedure. I learned a lot of things about finances. It was a for-profit institution that I worked at, and so they liked numbers, and I like to be the golden child sometimes. So I learned a lot about numbers just so I understood exactly what they were looking at and what they were looking for. And then after that, I decided to travel and expand my clinical knowledge. And so I left and went back to the bedside or the stretcher side and did a stint in float pool. I did a stint in trauma ICU and pediatric trauma, and then in some other ERs across the country, one of them in New York, another one in South Carolina, and then one in West Virginia. So that was pretty fun. And by that time I had finished my master's degree, and I got a call for the job here as the manager of the emergency department. And I came out, I interviewed, I fell in love with the facility. I fell in love with the area, and told myself I'd be here for 2 years. I've now been here for 4. And yeah. And then throughout that, they've given me additional responsibility. And so for about a year now, I've had both urgent cares, the freestanding emergency department, and then our main emergency department here on the Regional Medical Center campus. So
Nice.
It's really great. Yeah, it's been good.
So how big is your ER, not your urgent care?
So our ER now sees about 45,000 visits. We have about 36 care spaces with a current expansion going on right now to expand up to 56. So we got construction going on in the parking lot, which is great. And
Lovely.
We'll have about, I love it. And then we'll have about 56 care spaces overall, which I'm super excited about. Yeah.
That's cool. Boy, that's going to keep you busy.
Yes.
It's for sure.
It's going to be exciting.
It's a good way to say it's going to be stressful. So,
yes.
How'd you get into nursing? Why nursing?
So I always knew that I wanted to help people. And then I thought I wanted to be a doctor. So I went first and got a bachelor's in biology and completely wasted like $30,000 of money and scholarships. Not completely wasted, I guess. But after I finished that, I realized I was like, I don't want to be a doctor. I don't want to go to school for, 8 more years, 10 more years. And before I even get to start my life. And so I applied to one nursing school and got in the first time I applied, and then realized then how difficult it is to get into nursing school and how lucky I was to get into the school that I applied to. So I applied to Mercy School of Nursing, and it's no longer a thing, but it was a diploma program in Charlotte. And they only took 25 students out of over 600 applicants. So I was super
Wow.
blessed to even get in. Yeah. And it was a great school. It really was. Taught me a lot. So
Nice. So
yeah,
you started as diploma. What, did you go back and get your associates, or did you go straight to your bachelor's?
I went straight to my bachelor's, my BSN, and then got my master's in healthcare administration. And now in August, I start my DNP and at Yale. So I'm super excited about that
Holy
in
cow.
leadership. Yeah.
Holy cow. That's very cool. Now, question I always ask folks, you did MHA instead of MSN. Why?
So healthcare is a business, and whether you agree with the fact that it's a business or not, the reality is that it is a business. And so I think that it's really important that our nurse leaders have an equal seat at the table and equal knowledge whenever it comes to running that business, so that we can not only advocate for our staff and our department, but also advocate in a way where people feel like we understand the business of healthcare. So the CFO recognizes that we're not just being subjective or whining or anything like that, but that we have the numbers and the data and the knowledge and information to kind of back up those things you're advocating for or asking for. So I've always thought that was important, and that's one of the reasons I did it.
Okay, nice. And now going back for your doctorate. Why?
So I want to continue my career in a way where, as a leader, I'm able to change things, not even just at the department level, but start to be able to take on system level type scenarios and system level type leadership positions. And this DNP program at Yale is very specific in that it focuses on healthcare innovation and system leadership. So how to really lead a healthcare system and oversee what that looks like from a nursing perspective, and bring in evidence-based practice, and also set at the table with all those high-level decision makers in their various areas of specialty, like the CFO and ambulatory care network, and work together to really do what's best for ultimately the patient and the staff. So it's kind of exciting in a way that it incorporates all those things and is really making those major decisions that affect our patients. So.
Yeah. So what if nursing wasn't an option? If nursing wasn't an option for you, what do you think you would have done?
I probably would have been a teacher.
Okay.
I think I've always thought that I could have went and been a teacher and really influenced people, and I would still have gotten to help people in that sense, I guess, because I would have got to taught them. So I've always had that innate understanding in my soul that I was meant to help people. So.
Nice.
Yeah.
At what point in your nursing career were you sure you made the right choice?
I think it had to be probably early on in clinicals, where I had this elderly patient that I was helping up to the bathroom, and unfortunately she didn't make it to the bathroom. And so we had a little bit of an accident all over the place.
Oh, no.
And yeah, it wasn't a pretty scenario or situation, but
Okay, wait, hold on. So that's when you decided you made the right choice? Because that's
I
not what I would have
know.
been thinking. Like, I would have been thinking the exact opposite, going truck driving. Maybe I should be a truck driver.
Well, and she was so apologetic and so sweet. And so, like, I'm so sorry, I tried. And, she just wanted me to help her. And so I just took care of it, and I helped her, and I got her what she needed. And, we had that, like, it was like a connection, because she was, of course, I'm sure, super embarrassed. And this was my first time doing it, but she was like super sweet. And, I don't know, just right then after I helped that lady, I remember crying on the way home and being like, wow, like, I really hope that she remembers me in some way, just as like this sweet little student nurse that helped her whenever she had an accident. I don't know. So I know it just.
You, my friend, are a saint.
No, not at all. But I just remember I was so naive back then, right? Like, you're a student nurse, you don't know a whole lot or anything at all. I still don't know anything, but that's funny.
How funny is that? Yeah. I got to
Yeah.
tell you, that wouldn't be the moment in my career where I'm like, I made the right choice. There might be poo on my pants. That's not
Yeah.
mine, but I made the right choice, by golly.
Yeah.
That's funny. You, my friend, are a
Oh.
saint. I at the end of interview, you're done. You're a saint. Let's get you your wings, right? Tell the audience about a patient who changed the way you practice.
Oh my gosh. I feel like we've all had so many of those, but one of them, I was a charge nurse in that very first ER, and he was a psych patient, and we were an ER that saw 250 patients a day. And we were busy, and I had oversight of, a 65 bed ER, not to mention a 10-bed observation unit. And he come in, he was a psych patient, and I, quote, felt like I didn't have time to be with him at this moment. So I put him in the consult room with security and just said, hey, take care of it for me. I'll get him to a room as soon as I can. Well, this consult room is just this like little room off of the waiting room. He goes in there, security puts him in there, and these must have been some new security guards. I hadn't met him yet or something like that. And the camera shows that that security guard walked out of that room, and within 60 seconds, that patient had taken his white t-shirt off and wrapped it around the door jamb and attempted to hang himself in my waiting room.
Holy shit.
Yeah. And that, they have told us and continue to tell us, and now I preach it, that, psych patients are some of the highest acuity patients that you have in your emergency department. You have to understand how to take care of them. You have to understand how to mitigate the risk, not only to themselves and to the staff. And I did not, I think, take it as seriously as I should have until that moment.
Yeah.
And I learned a lot from that, because then my director said, well, guess what? You get to write the new psych policy and present it, and put in the new process and make it work, because we're going to teach you something from this. And she's right. I was able to do all these things and make it better, but I never forgot that patient. And he systematically changed the way that I looked at psych patients and their acuity level and how dangerous they can be to themselves or to others. So
Absolutely. Holy cow. Now, do you guys see a lot of psych patients in your emergency department?
So we used to have a whole area where we held psych patients. And then from that, our organization built a crisis triage center. So now psych patients come to the ER, they're given a medical screening exam, and then they go over to that crisis triage center where there's a psych nurse practitioner during the day. And then at night, they hold them until the psych nurse practitioner comes in during the day to hopefully mitigate or eliminate their crisis. A lot of times they just might need some medication adjustment or refills or whatever. And then if they do need inpatient, we can refer them to our inpatient behavioral health center. And so then they'll be admitted there. So that way we don't have a significant amount of holds in our ER anymore, which is huge. So
That is huge. Holy cow. 'Cause, I mean, so many, every ER I've been in has had issues with psych patients. They're the hardest patients
yeah.
to dispo. They're the hardest patients to get out. They're oftentimes the hardest patients to take care of.
Mm-hmm.
What advice do you give nurses taking care of those psych patients? What
I think
what are
it's,
your tips for
yeah,
nurses taking care of behavioral health?
I think it's really important to assess them very timely, to put them in a safe place and then assess their overall situation and where they fall on the spectrum, but then also create that contractual agreement verbally with the patient to say, can you promise me you're not going to hurt yourself right now? Can you promise you're going to let me help you? But then also recognizing that there are those patients that connect better with one person than they do another. And I think that you can't let that hurt your feelings or take it personally, but you have to also recognize that maybe I'm not the right nurse for this psych patient at this very moment, and maybe find someone else to come in and try to mitigate whatever's going on, whether they're upset, angry, or they're sad. You really want someone who can connect with them during that vulnerable time to ensure their own safety and the safety of everyone around them. The other thing I'm big on is an environmental patient safety checklist. So we have that created within our organization that we check on a regular basis to ensure the patient's environment is safe and doesn't allow them the ability to, pull stuff off the wall, or you accidentally left the thermometer in there, and or you gave them access to something that they could hang themselves with, or so on and so forth. So I think that's the other part, is being very aware of the environment, connecting and assessing the patient as soon as possible, and then really developing your ideas for treatment and working with those experts like your behavioral health counselor or the physician to see, like, where do we go from here. So.
Yeah. Yeah. I gotta tell you, I know that's one population that there's a lot of people that really struggle with. They either, I think you either feel like, you either recognize that behavioral health is a big problem. You recognize it truly is an emergency. They may not be there for an emergency, but it is truly an emergency, or can be an emergency, I should say. And you either like treat and respect that, or you don't. And if you don't, I know so many people that ends up kind of biting them right in the tail, because they're like, you had this patient and they go and do something bad to themselves, or they go and do, harm to someone else, or have risk for, and end up creating a ton more work than you thought they would be in the first place.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's hard.
Yeah. And I remember, a lot of this stuff as nurses, I think that's probably the best thing about nursing, is we learn a lot of it on the job, just through experience. But I just remember two very distinct moments where there was this young girl who was having a psychiatric crisis, and no one could get her out of the car. And I went out there and I was like, girl, you're gonna have to get out of this car so we can take care of you. And for some reason, that she needed that type of connection, and she listened to me and walked right out of that car, came in the ER, she let us take care of her. And then on the opposite end of that spectrum, I had a guy that I tried to, tell him he needed to calm down, and we were here to take care of him. And that just made it worse, to the point that he escalated. And so then I had to take a step back. So I think each of those moments you kind of figure out, hopefully, and you learn from, and you figure out how to take care of those patients and address them. So it's interesting.
One of the things I find is that ER nurses are great at being whatever you need. And like, we're so good at figuring it out. Like, we can be like, okay, this guy needs nice. This guy needs all my nice, all my kindness, all my caring. This guy needs a little harder nice. This guy needs a nice, but he needs a nice kick in the ass is what he needs. And you find the same thing both as a nurse with your patients, but also as a leader. With a leader, you may end up treating your two staff members, two very different people. You may end up treating them completely different. Right? Yes. Do you find the same thing to be true in your leadership?
Yes, all the time. It's really just about connecting with people and meeting them where they are. But you are very right in that some people want, in leadership, we teach the sandwich, where it's like, here's a positive, here's a negative, and here's a positive. And some people don't want the sandwich. They want you to just tell them what is wrong so they can fix it and then move on with their life.
Yeah. Get to the point. Tell me what you need. I'll fix it. I'll move on. Tell me how wonderful I am. Just tell me what I screwed up.
Yes. And some people really need that reassurance. And they need, even after the fact, you give them the sandwich, you tell them to work on it. And then a couple hours later, they're back in your office like, are you sure everything's okay? Am I okay? And it's like, yes, you're okay. I just need you to work on this. So some of those people need that reassurance and that constant just oversight and help and uplift. And some people they don't want any of it. They want you to tell them what's going on and move on with their life. And then they come back a few months later. Did I do this better? Is that better? Yes, it's better. Great. So it's very interesting.
It's kind of funny. People are kind of funny that way.
They are. They have, they carry their own preconceived notions and their own ideas and their own knowledge and their own experiences with them. And it really translates into who they are and how they take crucial conversations, or even just to take recognition. Some people are like, please do not say I did a good job in front of everyone. And you're like, okay.
You're like,
all right.
But you did.
Yeah, but you did a great job. And they're like, you can just write me an email. And I'm like, okay, I will do that from now on. So
one of the questions I usually ask is about a medication error or something like that. I'm going to flip it on you a little bit just to kind of pick your leadership brain. You have a brand new staff member, brand new nurse who makes their first med error. How do you handle it?
So what I normally do is, first off, you have to understand that I preach transparency 110% in my department. And so if there is something like that occurring, the notion is that as long as you are very transparent about it, and once it's immediately recognized, you let us know, it's not going to be punitive. But what it does end up being is usually a project for you. So, for instance, I had a nurse who miscalculated TPA and literally was about to push it before her preceptor was like, wait a second. Number one, you didn't have somebody double check that. And number two, you're setting her about to push this medicine. And she was like, well, the doctor said we have to push it. We have to push it now. And she's like, yeah, we do, but we also have to be safe.
Yeah.
And this is a near miss med error. So we're going to finish this with the patient and then we're going to talk about what that looks like. And so she put it in an occurrence report and then they immediately came in my office and told me. And so her job project then became that within the next 2 weeks, she had to create a 3 trifold poster board to put in the break room with a 5-question quiz on how to calculate TPA doses and what the proper policy and procedure is to administer TPA to a patient. And then all the nurses had to complete that little 5-question quiz, and she had to make sure that they completed it. I wasn't going to track them down because I'm not the one that made the med error, right? And by doing that, she's able to highlight a couple things. She's able to highlight that transparency in our department is okay. It's not punitive. It's a learning opportunity, and it's a way where we can educate ourselves and then also educate our team to ensure that anything that's unsafe doesn't happen again to the next patient. So it keeps our next patient safe. So
Yeah, I like that. It's good. It's a great way to do it.
yeah,
Do you hire new grads in your ER?
we do.
What do you look for? What do you look for in a new grad that you're going to hire?
So for new grads, particularly, we look for either passion or professional experience that can relate to the ER. So a couple different things. So usually they go hand in hand because if someone wants the ER, I want to know that they want the ER.
Yeah.
I want them to come in there and have already joined the ENA. That's one thing. Started to look at either they've gotten their ACLS or they've gotten their BLS. They've actually have some type of exposure to an ER in some way, whether they've shadowed or volunteered, or they were a tech, or they were a phlebotomist, or they were a transporter even. But they at least know what an ER looks like, because what Grey's Anatomy says an ER looks like is, as we know, not what an ER looks like. So if you've never even stepped foot in the ER, I don't want you as a new grad, because I need you to have a general understanding of what all that looks like. But then also that passion for not just emergency nursing, but for nursing and learning and being a self-starter and being willing to go home and look things up. And as you go through interviews with people, you kind of, you get that feeling of, oh, this person's really passionate and they're really motivated and they're going to do a great job and they're going to be like a sponge and absorb all that information. Because being a new grad in the ER is hard. And so if you don't have a strong leadership and strong preceptorship, but then also this strong internal motivation, then I just don't think you can be successful. So,
And you said you started in the ER as a new grad?
I
Or
did.
you started as a resident? So you said residency, but I assumed ER, but I'm not. Is that true?
It was ER. Yep. So
Okay.
I had done my residency in the ER, my clinical preceptorship, and then we did a 6-month residency through the organization before I was technically a full-fledged ER nurse and got my got my little RN badge. It literally would say on our badge, I'm new. Please don't ask me anything. It did say that, but it said I'm new. And it's like, oh, we're not asking you anything. You don't know yet. So that's ours. I swear ours was like, welcome to the organization, new employee, or something like that was our badge buddy. And until you finish residency, you didn't get your RN badge buddy. So
Tell me about your first shift in the ER.
oh. So my first shift in the ER, actually on the floor with my preceptor, I just feel like I wrote down things all the time because I just had no real concept like I thought I did. And then I obviously didn't. And it was just all about absorbing the information and seeing those people. And I had no idea that you could do CPR on a patient and then start to be cognitive and like moving again. And then whenever you stop CPR, their arms just like flop back because they're not getting any circulation. Just the pump is broken, right? The heart pump is broken. The electricity's great, but the pump's broken because if you give them CPR, they're awake. And you're like, oh, what? That happened on my first shift, and that was crazy. Yeah.
Holy
It was
cow.
crazy.
Holy
It was
cow.
good though.
And when were you sure you made the right choice of going into ER?
It was probably 14, 15 months in, whenever I finally felt like if something came through the door, I could at least make sure that they weren't going to die right at that moment, or do everything in my power to do that. Right. Like, or at least know where my resources were to ask for help, or at least just felt confident, I guess, in knowing that, okay, I can handle this. I can take care of it, or I have people here that can help me do that, or, whatever that looks like, but that there's a path to getting this patient taken care of. And it took a while. And I always tell my nurses whenever I hire them that it's about a year before you really start to feel good about it. But then you can't get too cocky, because then the universe throws you something that you've never seen before, and you got to figure that out too. So
Absolutely right. One of the last questions I always ask everybody are what are 3 things a brand new ER, or let's say brand new ER, as long as we're talking about nurse residents, what are 3 things a new nurse needs to remember? And what are 3 things they can just go ahead and forget?
So 3 things a new nurse needs to remember. I think one of the big ones is that perception is everything. So I teach my nurses that they need to understand, whenever they're taking care of a patient, even though medicine and nursing and the emergency department is their reality, it is very much so not the patient's reality. And so we have to understand that their perception is their own reality, and address that in a way where we care out loud, we tell the patient what we're doing, we keep them informed, because a lot of times they're scared. And this is, whether it's a real emergency or not, it is their emergency, and probably one of the scariest days of their life sometimes. So I think that's important to remember that whenever it comes to the patient. The other thing is, check it once, check it twice, check it again. Never stop double checking yourself. You're never too good to ask someone to double check you. And then the third one would just be, speak up whenever you see something that could potentially be a safety issue with the patient, or a safety issue with another staff member. It's okay to speak up, because we're in an environment where things are busy and things are crazy, and we get tired and we get emotionally exhausted. And whenever we recognize those things in ourselves and in each other, we really have to speak up and say it, so that we can address it and ensure that we're keeping each other safe and we're keeping our patients safe. 3 things that they could forget. That's hard for me as a leader, but because then my people are going to be listening to this. 3 things to forget. So forget about, I would say, forget about all those things that society taught you about doctors, and that they're geniuses and that they're gods. A lot of them are really smart, but they do not know everything, and they are still human, and they still make mistakes. And I think that that's really important, that we forget that preconceived notion that, they're so much smarter than everyone, and that they know everything, and that whatever they say is exactly what needs to be done. I think that would be a really big thing. The other one is, if anyone has ever told you you can't be something, forget that too, because that's craziness. So you can be whatever you want to be, whether it's the director of the ER one day, whether it's the CRNA, whether it's a nurse practitioner, you can do whatever you want to do. So don't let anyone tell you that you can't do that. And then I think don't get too caught up on giving yourself all to one thing, I guess, as far as, we want you to give 100%, but you also got to take care of yourself. And, but also realize that, whenever you're here, you're taking care of patients. So I think it's just, forget about that normalcy that, you're used to whenever you're working a 12-hour shift, because it's not always like that. It's, you come in and it can be crazy. You come in, it can be calm. And we get to eat and pee whenever we can, but, it's worth it at the end of the day. So.
Absolutely. Now, you have a group called Amplify Your Awesomeness. Tell the audience a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it stemmed from back in October of 2019 in Austin. I gave a presentation called Amplify Your Awesomeness, and it talked about different things I've done with my team over the past 3 years in regards to providing timely, efficient, effective, safe patient care in the ER. And we went through a variety of different projects and process improvements and shared the way that we did them and the results. And we had a lot of really great feedback. And a lot of it were from leaders looking for not necessarily the specific ideas, but the validation that everyone's having these problems. And maybe there's a tip or trick from one of your process improvements that I can take and use in my department, or something that I can use to, do better. And from that, I created the group Amplify Your Awesomeness so that we could share those tips and tricks, and also share the different things that we find interesting about leadership, the different ways that we've implemented things, the different resources out there. There's so many leadership resources out there. It's a way to really hone in on the ones that are good and applicable to, nurse leaders everywhere. And so we have a Facebook page, we have a Facebook group. It continues to grow, which excites me a lot. And then recently I did a virtual part of the virtual conference that ENA put on that said, amplify your leadership in a crisis. And so then we talked about how a lot of times that normal leadership principles that we put into play don't always work. And, in a crisis, you really have to think on your feet, and you have to change the way that you're disseminating information and the way you're communicating with your team. And if there was ever a moment for transparency, it was during a crisis. So that's another one that we recently put out in April. And so, and the other cool part is they're doing a Flashback Friday during EN20X, and I'll be giving the Amplify Your Awesomeness updated version presentation during that as well. So
That's
exciting.
Awesome. That's super exciting.
It's all good. Yeah, it's good stuff.
Very cool. How exciting. What advice do you have for nurse leaders? How do you be a better nurse leader?
I think nurse leaders have to remember that we have a multi-generational, multifaceted workforce right now, and that no one's working for the gold watch anymore. And so we have to build that loyalty in different ways. And some of the ways you do that I have found effective is through transparency with your people, explaining to them the whys behind some of the decisions that you're making, and making yourself accessible for them to ask those questions. The other thing is that they really want connection, or someone that can hear them. And so I speak to every single one of my people at least once a quarter, in a 10 to 15 minute quick one-to-one that just addresses some issues, questions. Do you have everything you need to do your job? How can I support you? That kind of stuff. And then also supporting people whenever they do want to do better for themselves. So, some people want to be preceptors, some people want to go into leadership, some people want to extend their education and knowledge clinically. And so whatever that is, making sure that they have the tools to feel supported and feel fulfilled in their own career, that they're making a difference, and that they're part of something bigger than themselves, and that they're helping people. I think all those things are really important, whenever you talk about leadership, especially in nursing, because we have some really great people. And a lot of times they just need the tools, or the motivation, or the uplifting, or the support, or sometimes the crucial conversation and the coaching for them to be able to get better. And so it's meeting people where they are and providing them with the resources you can, and then getting your boat moving all in the same direction is super, super important.
That's awesome. Dustin, that's all the questions I have for you, dude. I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. It's been a fun interview. It's been a lot of fun to do. And I can't thank you enough for your time. I
appreciate you, Kevin. You're awesome. Your podcast is awesome.
Thank you so much. Very kind of you to say. So
it's great.
Thanks for listening to the Art of Emergency Nursing podcast. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Facebook.